Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for Building Bridges. We are and our Spilling the Tea candidate forum. Tonight, we have joining us Heidi Beidinger, who is running for the Indiana House in District 5. And I will do, my name's Melissa, and I am the endorsement manager for Building Bridges and for Roadmap for Progress. I will do a quick intro of Building Bridges and what we're all about, and then kick it over to Heidi to do an intro to herself, and then we will get started with a Q&A from our postcard writing volunteers. Building Bridges was formed when Mayor Pete was running for president in 2020, and we were all in one way or another involved with his campaign, whether directly on staff or in different states. And we are guided by the principles of servant leadership, and we really work to empower and mobilize and train relational grassroots organizers to go out and kind of train the trainers and really hit organizations and even county parties to train them how to function in an election cycle. Our values are based on Mayor Pete's rules of the road, which are respect, belonging, truth, teamwork, boldness, responsibility, substance, discipline, excellence, and joy. We have 4 lenses that we try to maintain and do everything that we do through these 4 lenses, which are bridging the rural and urban divide, belonging, democratic reform, and racial equity. Every Tuesday and Thursday throughout the week, we offer free organizational classes from everything from Civics 101 to how to have those conversations that break through and reach voters that may disagree with you. And they are on our buildingbridgesforamerica.com website, where you can sign up to join us for any of these organizational classes. We also have our endorsements arm, which are our days of action, like on Sunday evenings when we do our Q&A with our candidates. We also text bank, phone bank, and write postcards for all of the candidates. And right now we currently have 35 active candidates in this election cycle. Upcoming candidate events we will be doing next Sunday. We will be doing Lauren Jewett, who is running for the Jefferson Parish School Board in Louisiana near New Orleans. And tonight, our special guest is Heidi, who is running again for Indiana House District 5. Her website where you can find more information about her campaign is HeidiForIndiana.com. And you can find her on all of her social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Heidi for Indiana. And you can also follow all of us on social media at Building Bridges and the number 4 America. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and kick it over to Heidi for an intro to her, why she's running for office, and tell us a little bit about herself.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me, Melissa. This is awesome to have this opportunity to talk to you guys. And thank you for the endorsement. As Melissa said, I'm Heidi Beidinger, and I'm a candidate for Indiana House District 5. And, there's several things that were going on in my life that got me to this point. But first I want to tell you is that I'm a mom, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an educator, and now I find myself as a political candidate. In my day job, I'm a professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I also do community-based research, and I focus on public health and policy. And right now, I'm very laser focused on lead poisoning prevention. So teaching and doing research is my day job, and so now here I am finding myself as this candidate. And I would say that my campaign is grounded in 2 values, and that is freedom and inclusion. And it's the freedom for just about everything you and I can think of that's going wrong in Indiana, quite frankly. It's the freedom to breathe clean air and drink clean water. It's the freedom to feel safe when you're dropping your kids off to go to school. It's the freedom to have autonomy over our own bodies when we are making the most intimate of decisions, for instance, when and how to have children. These are the freedoms that I am fighting for. And then the inclusion piece is simply that I want people to be able to be who they were meant to be. that you get to choose the religion that you want to practice, that you can choose the person that you love and be able to live this life comfortably and safely. And so everything that we are doing in my campaign is grounded in those two things, freedom and inclusion. A little bit more about my background. My parents are from Europe. So I'm first generation here in the United States. And my mom and dad grew up in tiny towns my mom is from the Netherlands and my father is from Austria. And they grew up there during World War II. My mom, being from the Netherlands, well, the two of them would tell my sisters and I stories all the time. I have three younger sisters. And my mom would talk about how people had been bombed out of their homes or were trying to escape the violence and the war that was happening. And because they lived on a farm, people literally were just showing up at their door and they're exhausted, they're hungry, they need a place to stay. Mom said for 4.5 years during the war, there were always extra people at the dinner table, always. And she said that they had to start peeling the potatoes after breakfast in order to have enough potatoes for dinner every evening for 4.5 years. I should also say she had 11 brothers and sisters herself. So they already had a big family, but there were always extra people sitting at that table. My dad, on the other hand, he was in Austria. And so he experienced a great deal of cruelty, violence, and poverty. Austria was occupied by the Nazis. And so he had experience where the soldiers would come into his home and literally would take whatever it is that they wanted. And it might have been their last amount of food. And they would just take what they wanted and they'd exit the door. And there was silence the entire time that this was happening. And it was intensely scary. But my dad said too, that they started learning from this because they're like, well, if they're going to come in and grab everything, then we should start hiding some things. And so they started burying the food all over the village. And the lesson from that is that if a neighbor or family member had to go without food because some of the soldiers had come in and taken everything, they would go unbury the food and bring it to their neighbors and their family. And so what my mom and dad taught me is that family is at the core of everything that we do when we live for, and that empathy is essential for humanity and for dignity, that we take care of each other. And so that was just always taught to my sisters and I. And so I bring those values, those experiences to this campaign. Then right up in this moment, I had actually I've been trying to recruit somebody to run in this position because I was sure that we could beat this incumbent because he literally is the do nothing candidate. And, but I couldn't find anybody. My friends started ghosting me. They wouldn't even answer my texts or anything. They were just like, I'm so done. Don't ask me to ask anybody else because I don't know anybody who will run. Well, then Dobbs happened on a Friday night or Friday. And then Saturday morning, I came down in the morning and my two daughters are sitting there at the kitchen table. And my younger one, who is 19 years old, has tears in her eyes. She looks at me and I'm like, oh my God, baby, what's wrong? And she said, Mom, what does this world hold for me? Indiana doesn't care about women anymore. Why should I even go back to school? And I was like stunned because I'm like, okay, I know we'd had conversations about this. This is really awful. But now she's really asking these really monumental questions of about her future and who she is. And she's only 19. While I'm sitting there processing that, my 25-year-old doesn't miss a beat and looks me in the eyes and says, Mom, it's time. And now my head was exploding because I was like, oh my God, she means I have to run. And I look at her and I said, oh my God, it's time. I have to run, don't I? And she goes, yeah, you do. Let's go talk to Dad. And about 4 days later, I drove down to Indianapolis. I filed my paperwork. 2 days later, I was caucused in and here I am running for office. And let me tell you, we have set up an amazing campaign. I hired a campaign manager, I have a director of comms, and then we have team captains that handle all kinds of activities, canvassing, postcard writing, social media, the texting, yard sign delivery, just all of it. And we have about 12 people on our team who have various responsibilities. And we're firing every day, working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, no less, and no kidding. So we're pretty damn fired up about this. Like I said, my opponent, he has put out 2 mailers, sort of attacking me, saying that I'm, a spend crazy liberal. I don't know where that comes from, because I haven't spent anything. I'm not a politician, so he's just taken some old sound bites and ascribing, to me. It's just like old. It's tone deaf, given what's happening in the state of Indiana. So that's about all that he's done so far. We were assuming that I was going to start being called like a baby killer or, those kinds of things, but that has not happened yet. But like I said, we've stood up a really strong campaign and we're firing on all pistons over here. So that's my intro. Thank you for letting me share my story, and I look forward to our conversation.
That's a great family story and also a reason for you to run. Destiny is also one of our, who is running for Indiana Secretary of State, is also one of our candidates. And she had talked previously about what kind of voting restrictions were in place currently. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because it's been a bit since we've talked to her about what's currently in place and what you would like to see change.
Yeah. So the voting restrictions, I think that the complicated thing about the voting restrictions is that there are just so many little details to everything. Like, why isn't it just simpler? Just even getting people registered to vote, all these deadlines, and things don't happen automatically. And you have to bring all these forms of whatever to wherever to register to vote. And people just don't have the information. Then the second piece is this mail-in ballot, right? The absentee ballot stuff. Also riddled with, do you meet this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, this criteria? It's like, if people want to do by mail-in, why can't they just do by mail-in? And why can't they just pick up a form somewhere? Because what if they don't have a printer at home and they can't print the form? And why aren't we making that easier? Then we have early voting, which is good. In St. Joe County, we have 2 locations, like they're the county city kind of buildings, the government buildings. And the hours are okay, but they're 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. So again, if you're working all day and, that might not be such a great situation. But again, it's not publicized anywhere. Our newspapers have like totally fallen down on the job. I mean, our newspapers are barely newspapers anymore. So that's problematic. And then the day of, we have 40 polling centers, which is different than what we've had in the past, that you can now go anywhere in St. Joe County. So if I work across the county, I can go vote over there, or I could vote over here by my house. But you can go anywhere in the county. And that's confusing for people because they were used to voting at their local library or their school or their fire station. And then that's all changed. So this whole thing about constantly changing the rules is enormously confusing for people. I would also add to this, because we have done away with civics in high school, that our students, our young people, they have no idea what's going on. They're lost. They're not even sure why they should vote. I was in the field today knocking on doors and ran into a young woman. She was 22 years old, and she's like, "Oh yeah," she goes, we've seen you on TV now." And I said, "Oh, well, good. Are you registered to vote?" She goes, "Oh no, I'm not registered to vote." I'm like, "Oh wow, we have a few more days. Let's get you registered to vote." And she goes, "No, I don't do politics." And it's like, oh, okay. This is the failure of our education system. We're not teaching people why it's important to participate in this process. So for me, when Destiny gets elected, when I get elected, I want to hear from the Secretary of State what her recommendations would be to streamline this process. And then I would want to be able to get behind that. She has the expertise in that space, and I would follow her lead on that.
That makes absolute sense to me. That it does sound like a lot of moving parts at the exact same time.
Right.
Tracy said, "Do you and Secretary Pete share the fact that you are both first generation Americans? Does that give you a unique viewpoint on American politics and society?"
Yeah. Does it give us a unique view? I think that it does. I grew up with my mom and dad's worldview. And my mom and dad talked to us about social justice all the time. And they talked about what it was like when Hitler came into power and what a dictator looks like and what, authoritarian regimes look like. And the truth of the matter is, when Trump was first running, my mom called it out. She was like, Trump reminds me of Hitler. She's like, he talks like him. And I remember my sisters and I were like, oh, that's mom. She's being like overly dramatic or whatever. And of course, now we all can see, what's going on here. He is authoritarian. He would love to, do what Putin is doing in North Korea, Kim Jong-un. And so I do feel like I've had a unique perspective on that. I have always valued voting and the political process, and that politics is about caring about each other. It's not what it is now. And now it's all about concentrating the wealth and the power among just a handful of folks. Did I just read like the billionaires in our country now control 75% of all the money in America? Some 50 or 75%. And it's absolutely insane. I don't know how the rest of us are even making it if they're hoarding that much money. And so that has to change. And the way that I view some of that is, unfortunately, we're responsible for what's happened. We perhaps have been asleep a little bit at the wheel, even though I've been involved in politics for 20 years, helped Pete on his mayoral campaign, his presidential campaign. I worked on Joe Donnelly's campaigns, Obama's. But the truth of the matter is, Democrats have been asleep at the wheel, and these guys have outflanked us, and they've outmaneuvered, and they were much more clever than we were. So here we are. We now know what we're facing, and we're in this for the long game. Now, God love her, Nancy Pelosi is doing an awesome job, but I don't want to be 80 years old and still doing this. So I want to help build that bench, right? So I want to win, get me in there, and let's start bringing young women into this process so that we can start building that bench. So we get these strong leaders, creative leaders, et cetera, so that they can come in and do this work. And I would say that, Pete really instilled that in his administration as a mayor. He brought in lots and lots of young people and then gave them the tools and the training that they needed. And then he let them go. He's like, okay, there are those projects, go fix those problems, figure this out. And then, they come back together as a team. I mean, he was a real role model for all of us here in South Bend.
Absolutely. And this kind of delves into that. Tracy wants to know, how are the Indiana Dems work to become more competitive coming along? She said, from the outside looking in, it seems encouraging.
Yeah, that actually the Indiana Dems are becoming more competitive. Yeah, it is encouraging. I would say that we are doing a better job of communicating across campaigns. Hey, and it's not perfect, so I don't want to pretend like it's a panacea and like everything is just going off beautifully. But there is no doubt in my mind, we're now showing up for each other. We have events where we're seeing each other, where we've got our arms around each other, we're taking those photos, we're supporting each other, putting each other's signs up. And locally here in St. Joe County, one of our townships, there were 4 of us who need to win Harris Township. So the 4 of us have one walking piece. All 4 of our faces are there. We divided up that township and we said, you take that quadrant, I'll do these, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're working together because we think we're stronger when we're working together. And then what ended up happening is that there was that tumble, that domino effect. Suddenly now the folks who were in the southern part of the county, now you saw 3 or 4 of them on a walking piece. And so, and you can feel the camaraderie, and people are using language like, I want you to win just as much as I want to win. It's that important. Yeah. And the other thing too is, I have one colleague in particular, he tells people, he goes, the barbarians are at the gate and we're barely holding them back. And this is it. I mean, Destiny has said it too, statewide, that she's like, we're in the fight for our life. Democracy is on the line right now. I mean, women are on the line, but literally democracy now is hanging by a thread. If we don't win this November, that Diego Morales is going to come in and he's going to change all of those voting requirements, instructions, and everything else. He's going to make it much more difficult for all of us to vote. They're going to purge the rolls more than they usually do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we won't have access to our constitutional right to vote. We just won't. And there won't be anybody who's going to change it, certainly not the Supreme Court. So if we don't fight like hell for this one in the next 4 weeks to get these Democrats elected, we're going to lose our democracy, especially here in Indiana. So it's that serious. It's that serious what we're fighting for here.
Absolutely. I feel you over, and I'm just next door to you in Ohio, so I absolutely hear you.
Yeah.
To pivot to abortion and women's rights, what's the status of abortion in Indiana right now, and what do you see happening next? Because I know that, there was that huge news article of the 10-year-old coming from Ohio to Indiana to get her abortion, and a while back, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's awful. And do you know that the doctor who helped that 10-year-old, of course, was essentially, called out by our AG, Todd Rokita, and put her name all over every paper and TV and all that. And she's had to have now full-time security. She and her children, her whole family, have now had to have security because Todd Rokita unleashed this ridiculous thing. She was operating legally, and now she is being victimized the way that she is. It's atrocious, and Todd Rokita needs to go as well. I mean, he's a disaster for Indiana and for humanity. So where we are, so the legislators passed one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the United States, and essentially set some arbitrary rules about when women can have an abortion and who can say when they can have an abortion. They did allow for a rape and incest and fatal fetal anomaly, as well as life of the mother exceptions. Just so you know, my opponent said no to rape, incest, and fatal fetal anomaly exceptions. He said if there's going to be an abortion, it can only be for saving the mother's life. That's it. So he actually went even further than what Indiana passed on the books. So this was probably now, I think it's about 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, actually a Republican judge just south of Indianapolis filed a stay against the abortion ban. So right now in Indiana, we are able to legally perform abortions just as we were before the ban. And that's where we are at the moment. So it's this weird limbo kind of place. And it really screwed people up because they were heading off to different states and making other arrangements. And of course, the clinics where they were performing the abortions were already shutting down, because that's part of the restrictiveness, is that abortions can only now be performed in hospitals. And oh, by the way, hospitals only had conducted 2% of all abortions. So now we're overloading a system that was already overloaded by COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So where are we going from here? Well, I can't imagine that that stay is going to last. I think that the stay will be lifted and we will return to a very restrictive abortion ban. I do believe that come the springtime, when we go into session, I think that they will re-argue things and they will try to make it more restrictive. And they have already signaled that they want to come after contraceptives, including the distribution of condoms and birth control. So we're about to go a whole hell of a lot more restrictive here in Indiana. And, as my daughter, who's 25, she's like, I can't stay in this state. I can't stay in this state. I'd like to start thinking about maybe having a family, but you can't do that here in Indiana now. 1 in 4 pregnancies become unhealthy. 25% of them, and they result in all kinds of things that are not easily quantifiable, and they often don't get discussed because they're really traumatic events. And so as women, we tend not to discuss those things. They're discussed with our partner, our immediate family, and a doctor, and so forth. And now what's being forced to be discussed are all these traumatic events that women have experienced, and all the men are forcing us to have these conversations. But my point about the 1 in 4 pregnancies become unhealthy is that we need that full range of abortion care to ensure that the mom's health, right, is preserved. Because I'll tell you, these men, they don't give a shit about that. They don't give a shit. They will allow that mother to hemorrhage and die on that table, even though the partner is standing right outside that door with children. It's monstrous what is happening in our country right now. It's absolutely monstrous. And it is amazing that it has taken hold, that they've got such a grip on us the way that they do. So I have no blinders on about this. It's going to get worse. We're not in a better situation. If we have a blue wave and people come out and they knock on those doors and they vote, and then they get 5 friends and they tell them that they need to get out and vote, et cetera, we may be able to stop some of this. But if they don't, that's where we're headed. No birth control, no condoms. I don't know what they're looking for. A society that doesn't have sex anymore? I don't understand it, because I don't understand it. It's an odd society that these men are trying to create. It's no society that any of us want to live in. Like I said, we just want to live the life that we were meant to live, to love somebody, to care for people, right? So,
yeah, I hear you. So to go along with the tangent you were talking about, there's been a so-called brain drain, I think, in a lot of states. And I think Indiana is one of those, like Ohio, where we have problems keeping college students or college graduates to stay in the state and not leave and go somewhere else for either higher pay, better, whatever reason they have. How would you like to, what kind of things can you do when you're elected to kind of hedge that flow?
Right. So one is, if we have the Democrats, repealing SB1, the abortion ban, would be the step in the right direction. Right now, IU Health is having their OBGYN residents go to Illinois to get that training, because they can't do the training here. We don't have enough support. And we've got so many OBGYNs that are leaving the practice or leaving Indiana because it's all so uncertain. They're scared to death. They're used to being able to exercise their education, their experience, and now they're having to check in with the legal department about what it is that they can do. So that's one piece of it, right? If we're gonna train medical professionals, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we could keep them here in Indiana? Number 2, our public education is being dismantled. And I believe that public education is the hallmark and foundation of a democracy, a well-functioning democracy. But what the right has done is systematically, they are peeling apart and breaking down our public education. So what they're doing is that because our curriculum is watered down, and they are not teaching not always teaching what they need to do, they're actually training students for the jobs of today and not for the jobs of tomorrow. And what I mean by that is that you can teach somebody a specific skill to build something today, right? And that's marketable, that's true. But if you don't teach them the skills for a job that doesn't even yet exist, then how will they be prepared for a changing world? So some of those skills are like critical thinking skills, right? Problem solving skills, teamwork, team building, communication. Do you have oral communication? Can you do written communication? Leadership skills. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to pivot, so you know how to make those turns when you need to. And we're not doing that in Indiana. We don't do that. We train for the jobs of today, not of the jobs of tomorrow. So we're not prepared. Eli Lilly wrote that letter that everybody now has been talking about, how they wanted to build a new plant here, but they could not because we do not have the workforce that we need here in the state of Indiana. So instead, they are taking all that money and all those resources to North Carolina. So they're leaving the state of Indiana. Eli Lilly, how long have they been here? 100 years? And now part of their organization is moving to North Carolina because we can't accommodate that. Like, if that is not the biggest red flag that we've got to do things differently, I don't know what is. I can't believe that the legislators are just like, okay, you go to North Carolina and do whatever you want to do. It's pretty shocking. It's pretty
That's
shocking.
crazy.
Yeah,
absolutely. So your district in particular, is it suburban, rural, urban, and how diverse is it? And so how are you, if you do have rural and a high minority population, how are you reaching those voters?
Right. So South Bend is the closest urban center. So I would say that we are suburban, because we're the suburbs of South Bend. But we do have small town centers. And then there's a part of my district that you could definitely call rural. Lots of cornfields in between neighborhoods and houses and so forth. The way that we are reaching people are some of the traditional strategies. We're doing phone banking, we're knocking on doors, multiple mailers, we're handwriting postcards, and this is how we're reaching people. But we're also making sure that the message resonates with the group that we're sending them to, right? So it's not just like a one size fits all. It's, what do we need to be saying to women? What do we need to be saying to young people? Do we need to say something different if we're sending it to the folks who are in rural America? And the answer is yes. And so we're making those pivots to be able to do that. My district is not very diverse. It's probably about maybe 10% minority, persons of color, maybe a little bit more, but it's not very diverse. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying to reach those folks as well. We're doing that. We're doing that work as well.
Fantastic. That's great. Teresa said, I read how recently a town in Iowa just closed their library because everyone quit rather than ban books. Another lost their insurance. Libraries are radical public spaces to meet and share information, which are underutilized. We know this concerns the GOP because they are going after the library boards and banning books. How can Dems help protect our libraries and the people who work there going forward?
Yeah, well, one thing is that we've got to get on these boards, right? These library boards. We have to do more to support them. And of course, we didn't know, right? I mean, we didn't know that we were going to have to do this kind of work to protect our freedom to read. We didn't know, but now we do, right? It's like Maya Angelou, who says, when you know better, you do better. So this is it. This is our moment. Everybody on this call and everybody who's going to watch this session with us, we know better now, and we all have to step up. We all have to start serving in all kinds of ways. So that's number one. Number two, I'd like to see legislatively what we could do to support the public library system. And I'm not even sure, what that all could involve, but we need to do those things. I remember taking my kids to the library for, reading circles, and then, school would say, okay, you need to do a report on X, and then you would take the kids to the library and we'd find stuff. And then sometimes we went there just to do homework because it was a quiet space and it was different than being at home. And the libraries in St. Joe County are beautiful spaces. I mean, we have a whole host of new libraries and library space. So these are just gorgeous places to just, hang out and read, and they have newspapers and computers and magazines. And so we need to figure out a way to make sure that they do stay open. So I would say that, legislatively, I would have to figure out, like, when I get there, what we can do to make sure we preserve all of that.
I'm sure this is a topic that you hear a lot being at Notre Dame, the cost of higher education.
Oh,
And with President Biden just using his executive action to erase, certain amount of college debt and also capping the interest rate for current college students at 5% to help them as well. What does all of that mean for Indiana and its students and future generations of
yeah.
students?
So I have some firsthand experience. I've got family members who've reached out to me to say, "Oh my God, this is amazing that, part of my debt has now just been eliminated." And then some of them have said, "Oh my God, this is so awesome that, my interest rate has been capped and saved me money." It's dramatic. Kids now have so much debt that they can't buy their first car or their first home, right? This is the sort of the almost the natural order of things, right? We grow up, we go to high school, we graduate, maybe, and then we go to college, 2-year or 4-year or apprenticeship, and then somewhere along the line, you've saved up some money and you get to buy a house and you have a car, and now people are putting those things off. And they're staying with their parents or they're living longer, in rental. And of course, now the landlords have all figured that out. And so now rent has skyrocketed in our country. So we've had a tremendous backlash from that. I wonder about why it is that that the cost of college has gone up so much, so dramatically faster than inflation. It's a runaway cost, right? We call universities public universities because over 50% of their funding used to come from state government. And now my understanding is that that's less than 20%, sometimes even 10% of a university's budget is now coming from the state government. And so you can imagine then that the university is like, well, I've got to make up that shortfall. And so now we're just going to pass on the cost to the student. I don't agree with that. I believe that just like public education for K-12, why wouldn't a state have a vested interest in educating its citizens, either an apprenticeship, a 1 or a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree? Why are we not investing in our young people's futures? I see that as really short-sighted. So I would like to look at how it is. Like when I went to school, my tuition was a hell of a lot less than what I just helped my children to pay to go to school. How do we look at our state budget again to see how we could be helping universities to educate young people? And then, of course, we've got to also talk about matriculation, right? We don't want kids starting their freshman year and then lo and behold, 50% of them drop out before sophomore year. I don't want that either, right? That's a waste of time and money for everyone. So how are we making sure that kids are appropriately prepared so that they can be successful once they are in college? So we need to be doing those things as well. I think it's incredibly short-sighted that we are not paying attention to this issue. And particularly in Indiana, employers are telling us, you all don't have the workforce. Y'all don't have the workforce. So what are you guys doing? What are you educating for? So we've got a long way to examine this problem. But I was thrilled when Biden passed the this loan forgiveness. And oh, by the way, here in Indiana, I don't know if you heard this, but in Indiana, we are one of 7 states that are taxing young people on that loan forgiveness. I know. Yeah, I know. Let that sink in for a minute. It's so crazy. So you're all excited that you got that loan forgiveness. It's not like you have extra cash anyway because this loan is being forgiven. But then Indiana's puts their hand out and goes, oh, by the way, you're going to owe me about $350 to $500 for that forgiveness anyway. It's insane. And it's like I said, the young people are trying to save money to like maybe buy a car or buy a house. And now Indiana's going, and they have a $5 billion surplus. So what the hell do you need that money for anyway? Right? Let the young people try to prosper. They are the future. They're the ones who are going to contribute the next amount of taxes that are going to take care of the system. So it's to me, the GOP is living in this very moment. they don't think beyond the next few months. It's all about me, me, me. What can I get? How much can I hoard? That sort of thing. And that's not the way that I grew up. It's just not the way I grew up. So, it just keeps circling back to me all the time. Voting in November is the most critical thing that any of us could get people to do, is voting in November.
Staying on the activating young voters stream, with your background at Notre Dame, what are you doing to encourage your students to be active and educate themselves and do the work to be involved in the electoral process?
Right. So just really saying all of that. And of course, now my students know that I'm running for office, right? And of course, there are going to be mixed conversations in the classroom and mixed opinions and that sort of thing. So I don't walk into my class and go, this is me and this is who I am. And, although they can kind of guess where I'm headed and everything. But I really encourage civil discourse in my classroom. So as long as we're all civil and we can have a conversation with differing opinions, I'm all for it. We can do that. We can engage in that. But if it should become disrespectful, I want nothing to do with that. Then the conversation is over. But I talked to my students about the fact that in the United States, we really don't teach civics. I mentioned this before, that we don't teach civics the way that we used to. And I said it's lacking. And that we haven't really taught people how to vet good information. Like, where do you find news? How do you know which news to rely on? And how do you do that? And we have to teach people how to do that again, because people are listening to, they're listening to lies. We're just watching the unfolding of, that disastrous unfolding of the InfoWars, Alex Jones and that huge mess. Oh my God. And, people listened to that and they thought it was real. And then Alex Jones, there he is by the judge there. And he's saying, yeah, I knew it was a hoax. And it's like, you've ruined hundreds of thousands of lives because you've told them this, and we've allowed that to happen. And I still don't understand how we're not allowed to shut down people who are lying. It's ruining our humanity by allowing lying like that to happen. And the idea that it's free speech. How is that kind of lying different from yelling fire in a crowded theater? How is that different? I don't see a difference. I don't see a difference. You're ruining people's lives. You're endangering their lives. That is the same as yelling fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. So I just think we have a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do.
Tracy said from your story on why you chose to run, you're carrying a lot of weight. How do you cope with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question. Well, I'll be really honest. I usually am very raw. Last week was the first time I cried. It came to a head, and I was just like, oh my, and I was alone in my house. And I had a good cry because I was feeling extremely overwhelmed, and also this awesome responsibility to win, right? Like, I want to save the future of my children and your children. I want to make this a better world. I want better education. I want a cleaner environment. I want a safer neighborhood. I want people to walk into libraries and just, enjoy a library. It feels like an awesome, awesome responsibility with the heavy burden, emotional weight. But I also have really good support system. My family is absolutely incredible. They support me 100%. My husband has dinner waiting, 8:00 at night, 8:30 at night. And he's like, don't worry about the laundry. I got the laundry, so it's that kind of support. And then also having a sense of humor about about what's going on, because if you do take it all too seriously, honestly, it'll crush you. You'll be buried under the weight of the enormity of the problem that's ahead of us. Women are about to lose all of their rights here in Indiana if we don't vote in November. I keep saying that I might have to leave Indiana with what is about to happen here. But my mom is here, and so I can't go. My kids can go, and I've told them they're free to go. If things really go off the rails, I'm like, you are free to go. I don't want you to have to stay here and experience this, but I need to stay here with mom. So I will be here for a while. If things don't go right, if they don't go right, I will stay here. But I've told my children that if they need to go, then they need to go, because it's not going to be good here if these guys get their way. And I say these guys because they're old men making decisions for you and me. And it is really something how there once was the GOP who talked about the separation of church and state, right? That was the founding fathers, church and state. And now we've got an absolute overlap, and there are no apologies being made. It's all like they are brazen about it. It's my religion, and you all are going to listen to my religion. I don't care what religion you practice. It's their religion now. It's their rules. And it's big government. They keep saying they're the party of small government. No, that's big government. When you start trying to police everybody, that's big government. You're going to need a huge police force to govern all these things that you're talking about. So it's a fallacy when they say we're all about small government. No, don't. That's a joke, because all the police state that you're setting up, that's big government. And this is the society that they're trying to create for us. So, but going back to your point about how to cope with all of this, I am traditionally, like, one of my core values, I'm optimistic, and I have a tremendous amount of optimism about this election, and I have amazing amount of hope, because when good people come together, we can change things. We really can. And I'm surrounded by a good team. Every day I get texts. I just saw your sign. I'm with you. I'm getting those kinds of messages through Facebook and my website from people I don't know. And so then, you're penetrating those next levels, right? It's not just your group, but now people I don't know are reaching out and saying, I love your message. I'm going to vote for you. And that's powerful.
Very, absolutely. Yeah. Teresa wants to know, do you think the attack of trans athletes is really an attack on Title IX? The Republicans don't seem to be going after boys' sports.
Yeah, isn't that something? Of course they're not going to boys' sports. It's all about controlling women. The trans issue, birth control, abortion, this is all about controlling women. That's what this is. They don't want to pay us the same amount of money, right? We earn 75 cents on the dollar, roughly, maybe 84 cents on the dollar, compared to what men are doing for the same positions. This is about controlling women, plain and simple. And unfortunately, it's the same thing with trans. It's the exact same thing. It's monstrous. We're human beings. We're put on this planet to do what? Be subservient to men? That's ludicrous. It's a crazy notion. Yeah, we have a lot to contribute. We've already contributed so much. I honestly, I've said this before, I don't know what this end game is. I don't know what kind of society the men in Indiana in particular are trying to create. Like, who are the women that want to exist in this society? Y'all want to hang out together? Okay, but the rest of us, this is not for us. And so we're going to clash. This is going to be a problem. We can't let this continue.
Absolutely. So last question, and then the last kickoff, then the closing question. You mentioned all of your work with environmental issues. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Indiana and what's got you concerned beyond the big picture of climate change and the peril of our world in general? But
right. So Indiana is one of the most polluted states in the United States. Honestly, if you look at just about every metric that there is for health outcomes, environmental, social determinants of health, Indiana is in the bottom quartile for everything. Obesity, diabetes, asthma, smoking, quality of life, everything. We're at the bottom of it. Our waterways are the dirtiest in the United States, and our air quality is the third worst. We allow polluters to come into our state and pollute the hell out of Indiana with literally little to no regulation. If there is regulation, the fines are so minimal that the businesses pay the fines as a matter of routine. Oh, I was spewing too much, whatever. Here's $1,000. And they just keep on doing it because the fines don't matter. There's no teeth. And so they continue to do this. I can't remember the number of Superfund sites, but we're one of the states that have the most Superfund sites. 58% of all of our energy comes from coal in Indiana. So we are slow to even be thinking about green energy here. So we're behind the times. We're not thinking in a forward manner. I mean, I would love to be able to see our legislature just like open this up, like in like wild, innovative, creative ideas about how to take Indiana into the, 22nd century for clean energy and like start cleaning up Indiana. The lead poisoning that I work on is we're woefully behind in making sure that children are not lead poisoned in the state of Indiana. So we have so much work to do in environmental health here in the state of Indiana. The truth of the matter is, though, is we actually have the resources to be able to do this with a $5 billion surplus. So what an economist would tell you is because we have that surplus, it's actually an indication that the government is not working. This is not a positive thing that we have $5 billion set aside. Everybody's like, oh, this is so good. We're managing our money. No. We're not managing the money. They're hoarding the money and they're not spending it on infrastructure and the people. That's the problem. Yeah, you can have a rainy day fund, not $5 billion. That just means that you're not reinvesting in your people. And then we have this poor environment and we don't have the green energy that we need. So the truth of the matter is, again, if we get the Democrats in, let's start talking about green energy. We've got $5 billion. How do we incentivize getting more green energy here in Indiana? I think it would be a really exciting time to be able to sort of flip that script. And instead of being like, oh, we still, 58% of our energy comes from coal. And then we flip that and say, okay, now we're less dependent on coal. Now we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. And hopefully when we have a blue wave, people like you will help flip that switch. My last question is always, if you are a independent or leaning right, moderate in your district, why should they vote for you over your opponent?
Yeah. Why should they vote for me? It's because I'm going to protect their children, because I'm interested in protecting their future. It's not just my daughters. It's not just the daughters and the nieces and the granddaughters of the people sitting on this call. It's all of them. I want them to have a healthy place where they can thrive with their families. This is America. This is what we were born to believe about America. And so the truth is that message is resonating with Republicans in my district. I have Republicans reaching out to me who are saying, I'm not voting Republican again. I door knocked on a woman's door. I gave my little, intro spiel. And then she says to me, well, I've been a card carrying Republican my whole life. And I thought, okay, I took a swallow, right? And I was like, all right, I need to switch gears and everything. And then she says, but I am voting straight Democrat this year. And I was like, oh, I said, what's the switch? And she goes, well, women, of course. I have 2 daughters. And I'm like, you're not going to believe this. You and I have so much in common. I'm running because my two daughters asked me to run for office because they want me to help save their futures. And she goes, right on. And then we had this conversation about her girls, my girls, and so forth. Powerful conversations, but they're happening, you know, they're happening one at a time, at the door, on the phone, and so forth. So all of us just need to keep talking to each other, and asking people. My campaign manager, we're out to, get something to eat, and she'll ask the people who are making the sandwiches, you registered to vote? Who are you voting for? What are you voting for? That's what she asked, not who necessarily, but what are you voting for in November? Just stimulating that conversation. That's where we need to get back to. And if they say, hey, I'm all about guns and dirty environment, well, then you know what? The GOP are your people. Go for it. But if you're interested in women's rights and a clean environment and an awesome public, education for the state of Indiana, then come on over to Team Heidi. And we're going to get this thing done. So
That's fantastic. And, we are all pulling for you. I don't think anybody on this call can vote for you this time, but you definitely, we have your back, and we can't wait to see you elected.
Thanks, everybody.
Just to wrap things up, thank you for joining us. We know you have a crazy busy schedule running for office, and we can't wait to see you elected on November 8th.
Me too. Thank you, guys. Thanks for everybody's